My wife's illness was supposed to save our marriage until I fell in love with her nurse. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd been married to for 12 years. I'm James, and this is the story of how a lie almost destroyed 3 lives, including mine. It started 6 months ago when Rachel began complaining about fatigue. At first, I didn't think much of it. We'd been going through a rough patch, barely speaking except about bills and schedules. Our conversations had become transactions, our intimacy non-existent. I was working late more often, finding excuses to stay at the office rather than come home to the cold silence that had settled over our house like fog. Then Rachel collapsed at the grocery store. The call came while I was in a meeting about quarterly projections. "Mr. Thompson, this is Memorial Hospital. Your wife was brought in by ambulance." The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever problems we had, the thought of losing her terrified me in ways I wasn't prepared for. I found her in the emergency room, pale and fragile against the white sheets. The doctors ran test after test, but everything came back inconclusive. Her symptoms were real enough, though. The exhaustion, the weight loss, the way she'd wince when she thought I wasn't looking. They admitted her for observation, talking about rare autoimmune conditions and the need for specialists. That's when I met Sarah. Sarah Martinez was Rachel's night nurse, and she was everything Rachel wasn't. Where Rachel had become withdrawn and critical, Sarah was warm and engaging. She had this way of making even the sterile hospital environment feel human. When Rachel would snap at the day staff, Sarah would smooth things over with gentle humor. When I'd sit beside Rachel's bed, struggling for conversation, Sarah would effortlessly fill the silence with stories that made us both laugh. "Your wife is lucky to have someone so devoted," Sarah told me one evening as I prepared to leave. Rachel had been particularly difficult that day, complaining about everything from the food to the temperature to the way I was sitting in the chair. Not everyone would stay this long every night. I looked back at Rachel, who was pretending to sleep to avoid talking to me. "She's scared," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. "This whole thing has been terrifying for both of us." Sarah nodded, her dark eyes full of understanding. "Fear makes people do strange things sometimes. Push away the people they need most." As weeks turned into months, Rachel's condition remained mysteriously stable. She'd have good days and bad days, but never seemed to get dramatically worse or better. The doctors were baffled. They'd started talking about chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, stress-related disorders. Nothing definitive, nothing treatable. Meanwhile, Sarah and I grew closer. It wasn't intentional. At least, I told myself it wasn't. But when Rachel would drift off to sleep, Sarah and I would talk. About books, about travel, about dreams we'd had before life got complicated. She'd grown up in El Salvador, came to America when she was 12, put herself through nursing school while working 2 jobs. She had this quiet strength that I found magnetic. "I always wanted to see the Northern Lights," she confessed one night as we shared coffee from the machine down the hall. Sounds silly, I know, but there's something about the idea of natural beauty that's vast and unpredictable. "It's not silly," I said, and meant it. When was the last time Rachel had shared a dream with me? When was the last time she talked about anything besides her symptoms and how I was failing to understand them? I started bringing Sarah small gifts. A book of photography featuring the aurora borealis. Her favorite tea from a shop near my office. Nothing inappropriate, I told myself. Just kindness to someone who was caring for my wife. But the truth was, I was falling in love with her. The realization hit me on a Tuesday evening in October. Rachel had been particularly mean that day, accusing me of caring more about work than her health, of being selfish and distant. I'd sat there taking it, feeling guilty and frustrated in equal measure. When visiting hours ended, I'd walked out feeling emotionally drained. Sarah caught up with me in the parking lot. "James, wait," she called, her voice cutting through the autumn air. "I wanted to talk to you about something." We stood between the cars, streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her stethoscope. "I've been watching you these past months," she said slowly. "Watching how hard you try, how patient you are, even when—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Even when Rachel makes it difficult." "She's sick," I said automatically. "She's scared." "I know. And I admire your loyalty. But I also see what this is doing to you." She stepped closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume, something light and floral that was nothing like Rachel's heavy, expensive fragrance. "You deserve kindness too, James. You deserve to be appreciated." When she kissed me, I didn't pull away. It was soft and brief, barely more than a whisper of lips against lips, but it sent electricity through my entire body. For the first time in months, I felt alive. I'm sorry, she whispered, stepping back. I shouldn't have. You're married, and I'm her nurse, and this is so wrong on so many levels. Don't apologize, I heard myself say. Please don't apologize. We started meeting outside the hospital. Coffee shops, bookstores, the park near the river. We told ourselves we were just friends, that we were both dealing with the stress of Rachel's illness in our own ways. But the attraction was undeniable, electric, growing stronger every day. Sarah would text me during her shifts with updates about Rachel's condition, but also with little personal messages that made my heart race. Thinking of you, or hope your presentation went well, or can't wait to see you tonight. I felt like a teenager again, checking my phone constantly, smiling at messages that would have seemed mundane to anyone else. For the first time in years, I was excited about something, looking forward to something. The guilt was crushing, but so was the loneliness I'd been living with. Rachel had been pulling away long before she got sick. This illness had just given her a new reason to shut me out, to make me feel like I was failing her in yet another way. One evening in November, Rachel seemed particularly weak. She could barely lift her head from the pillow, and her voice was barely above a whisper. The doctors were talking about bringing in more specialists, running more tests. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, feeling like a fraud. I'm dying, aren't I? She asked, her eyes wide and frightened. No, I said firmly, though my own fear was real. You're going to get better. The doctors are going to figure this out. Promise me something, she whispered. Promise me you won't give up on us. Whatever happens, don't give up on our marriage. The words hit me like a physical blow. Here she was, possibly facing something serious, and I was sneaking around with her nurse. I squeezed her hand and promised, even as the words felt like ash in my mouth. That night, I broke up with Sarah. We met at our usual coffee shop, and I could see in her eyes that she knew what was coming. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize the signs of someone preparing to deliver bad news. I can't do this anymore, I said, not meeting her eyes. Rachel needs me, and I can't betray her like this. Not now. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. I understand. I do. But James, can I ask you something? I nodded. Are you happy with her? Really happy? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're slowly disappearing. Like you're becoming invisible in your own marriage. The question haunted me, but I held firm. She's my wife. She's sick. I made a commitment. Sarah nodded slowly. Okay, I respect that. But I want you to know, what we had was real. At least for me. And I hope someday you'll have the courage to choose happiness over obligation. She stood up, paused for a moment like she wanted to say something else, then walked away. I watched her go, feeling like I was watching my last chance at happiness disappear into the night. I threw myself into being the perfect husband. I took time off work to be with Rachel during her treatments. I brought her favorite foods, read to her, held her hand through the difficult nights. I was attentive and patient and everything I thought a good husband should be. And Rachel seemed to be getting better. Not dramatically, but gradually. She had more energy, complained less, even smiled occasionally. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Whatever was wrong with her seemed to be responding to the treatment protocol they developed. But something felt off. It was small things at first. The way Rachel would quickly change the subject when I asked about her symptoms. How she seemed to know exactly when the nurses would be making their rounds. The fact that her bad days always seemed to coincide with days when I'd been particularly distant or distracted. I told myself I was being paranoid. That months of stress and guilt were making me see patterns that weren't there. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger as Rachel's condition continued to improve. Then I saw Sarah again. It was at the grocery store, the same one where Rachel had collapsed 6 months earlier. I was buying ingredients for Rachel's favorite soup, trying to be the supportive husband I'd promised to be. I turned a corner, and there she was, reaching for something on the top shelf. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and she'd lost weight. But her eyes were the same, and when she saw me, I felt that familiar electric connection. James, she said softly. How are you? I'm okay. I lied. How are you? Are you still working at Memorial? She shook her head. I transferred to the pediatric unit. I thought it would be better, given. She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. How is Rachel? She asked, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Better, I said. Much better. The doctors think she's turned a corner. Sarah nodded, but her expression was strange. That's good. I'm glad. We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to tell her I missed her every day. But I didn't. I couldn't. I should go, I said finally. James, she called as I started to walk away. Be careful, okay? Just be careful. I had no idea what she meant. That night, I watched Rachel more closely than usual. She was animated, talking about plans for Christmas, about a trip we should take when she was fully recovered. She seemed almost giddy with health and possibility. But when she thought I wasn't looking, her face would go blank, like she was performing and had momentarily forgotten her lines. I started paying attention to other things too. The way she would always seem to have a flare-up when I mentioned working late. How her symptoms would intensify whenever I seemed to be pulling away emotionally. The fact that her medical bills were surprisingly low for someone with such a complex condition. I told myself I was losing my mind. That stress and guilt were making me paranoid. But the doubts kept growing. Then I found the pills. I was looking for aspirin in Rachel's purse, hoping to ease a headache that had been building all day. Instead, I found a small bottle of prescription medication I didn't recognize. The label was partially torn off, but I could make out enough to do an internet search. What I found made my blood run cold. The medication was used to induce symptoms of chronic fatigue and muscle weakness. It was sometimes prescribed for very specific conditions, but it could also be misused to create the appearance of illness. I stared at the bottle, my hands shaking. This couldn't be real. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was prescribed for something else. Maybe I was misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Rachel had been faking her illness. The realization hit me like a physical blow. 6 months of worry, of guilt, of watching her suffer, and it had all been a lie. The hospital bills, the treatments, the specialists, all of it built on deception. But why? What could possibly drive someone to fake a serious illness? The answer came to me slowly, piece by piece. Rachel had sensed I was pulling away. She'd seen the distance growing between us, felt the marriage slipping away. The collapse at the grocery store, the mysterious symptoms, the need for constant care and attention. It was all designed to keep me close, to make me feel guilty for wanting to leave. And it had worked. I thought about all the times I'd felt horrible for being frustrated with her. All the nights I'd lain awake worrying about her future, our future. The way I'd sacrificed my own happiness because I believed she was dying. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't breathe. I confronted her that night. Rachel, I said, holding up the bottle. What is this? The change in her expression was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she looked genuinely ill. I can explain, she stammered. Please do, I said, my voice deadly calm. Because right now, it looks like you've been lying to me for 6 months. It looks like you've been making me believe you were dying when you were perfectly healthy. She started crying, the tears coming fast and hard. James, you don't understand. I was losing you. I could feel you slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I thought if you saw how much I needed you. You thought you'd fake a life-threatening illness? I couldn't keep the horror out of my voice. Rachel, do you have any idea what you've put me through? What you've put the doctors through? The resources you've wasted? I know it was wrong, she sobbed. I know it was terrible, but I was desperate. I could feel you falling out of love with me, and I couldn't bear it. I thought if I could just make you remember why you married me, if I could make you see how much I needed you. So you decided to manipulate me instead of talking to me? I was pacing now, the anger building inside me like a pressure cooker. You decided to make me feel guilty for every moment I wasn't completely devoted to you. I was going to stop, she said desperately. I was going to get better gradually, and then everything would go back to normal. We'd be happy again. Happy. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Rachel, you've been lying to me for 6 months. You've made me feel like a terrible husband for having normal human needs. You've wasted thousands of dollars on medical bills for treatments you didn't need. How could anything built on that foundation ever make us happy? She didn't have an answer. But I wasn't done. There was something else, something that had been nagging at me since my encounter with Sarah at the grocery store. The nurse, I said slowly. Sarah. She knew, didn't she? Rachel's face went white. I don't know what you mean. She knew you were faking. That's why she transferred units. That's why she warned me to be careful. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they formed was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. She tried to tell me, didn't she? And you found out about us. Rachel's silence was answer enough. My God, I whispered. You knew about Sarah and me, and you used it. You used my guilt to manipulate me even more effectively. I loved you, she said desperately. I still love you. I just wanted to save our marriage. By destroying it completely? I shook my head. Rachel, what you've done. It's not just lying. It's emotional abuse. You've manipulated my emotions, my guilt, my love for you to control me. You've made me question my own sanity. The full scope of what she'd done was becoming clear. She hadn't just faked an illness. She'd orchestrated an elaborate psychological manipulation designed to keep me trapped in a marriage I was trying to leave. She'd used my own compassion and loyalty against me. I think you should pack some things, I said quietly. I need time to think, and I can't have you here right now. James, please, she begged. Don't throw away 12 years of marriage over this. We can work through this. I'll get help. I'll do whatever it takes. 12 years. I stared at her. Rachel, how do I know any of it was real? How do I know you haven't been manipulating me our entire marriage? How do I know anything you've ever said or done was genuine? The question hung between us like a poison cloud. Because the truth was, I couldn't know. If she was capable of this level of deception, what else might she be capable of? She packed a bag and went to stay with her sister. I called in sick to work and spent the next 3 days sitting in my house, trying to process what had happened. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd felt guilty about betraying, she didn't exist. She was a carefully constructed fiction, designed to manipulate and control me. Every symptom, every weak moment, every time she'd made me feel like a terrible husband for not being attentive enough. It had all been calculated. I thought about Sarah, about the guilt I'd carried for months about our relationship. She'd been trying to show me kindness, to give me the emotional support I wasn't getting at home. And I'd punished myself for it, convinced I was betraying a dying woman. But Sarah had known. Somehow, she'd figured out that Rachel was faking, and she'd tried to warn me. Be careful, she'd said. Not because she was jealous or vindictive, but because she could see what Rachel was doing to me. I called Sarah that night. Hello. Her voice was cautious, probably surprised to see my number after months of silence. Sarah, it's James. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. There was a long pause. Okay. You knew, didn't you? About Rachel. You knew she was faking. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, she said finally. I suspected it pretty early on. Her symptoms were too convenient, too perfectly timed. And some of the things she said, they didn't match what I was seeing in her charts. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, she said softly. I tried to hint at it, to make you see. But you were so devoted to her, so convinced she was dying. And I was compromised. I had feelings for you, which made anything I said suspect. Who would believe the other woman claiming the wife was faking? She was right. I probably wouldn't have believed her. I would have thought she was trying to break up my marriage out of jealousy. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry for everything. For not seeing it sooner, for making you feel like you had to stay quiet, for hurting you. James, she said gently, you were being manipulated by someone you loved and trusted. That's not your fault. What Rachel did, it was sophisticated psychological abuse. You couldn't have known. We talked for hours that night. About Rachel, about us, about the months of deception we'd both lived through. Sarah had carried the burden of knowing Rachel was lying, had watched me torture myself with guilt, had been forced to stand by while I slowly disappeared into my wife's web of manipulation. I kept hoping you'd see it, she said. I kept hoping you'd realize that healthy relationships don't require that level of sacrifice. That love shouldn't feel like drowning. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The divorce proceedings were messy and painful. Rachel alternated between remorse and anger, sometimes apologizing tearfully for what she'd done, other times accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. She seemed genuinely unable to understand why I couldn't just forgive and move on. It was just a mistake, she'd say. People make mistakes in marriage. That's what commitment means, working through the hard times. But this wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated campaign of psychological manipulation that had lasted for months. It was a fundamental betrayal of trust that went to the very core of who she was as a person. The financial cost was staggering. The medical bills, the lost time from work, the emotional toll, all of it built on a lie. But the deeper cost was to my ability to trust, to love, to believe in the authenticity of human connection. How do you recover from learning that someone you loved for 12 years was capable of such elaborate deception? How do you trust your own judgment again when you've been so thoroughly fooled? I started therapy, trying to unpack the years of manipulation I was only now beginning to recognize. My therapist helped me see that Rachel's behavior hadn't started with the fake illness. It had just been the most extreme example of a pattern that had been there all along. The guilt trips when I wanted to spend time with friends. The way she'd get sick or have a crisis whenever I had important work deadlines. The constant need for reassurance and attention. The way she'd make me feel selfish for having needs of my own. I'd been living in a psychological prison for years, and I'd been so gradually conditioned to it that I'd thought it was normal. Sarah and I started seeing each other again, but slowly and carefully. We both recognized that our relationship had been forged in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances, and we needed to discover whether it could survive in the real world. It wasn't easy. I was dealing with trust issues, with the fear that I might be missing red flags again. Sarah was patient and understanding, but she had her own concerns about being involved with someone who was still processing such a significant betrayal. But gradually, we built something real. Something based on honesty and mutual respect rather than manipulation and need. Sarah showed me what healthy love looked like, how it should feel to be with someone who wanted to support your growth rather than control your behavior. We're married now, and expecting our first child. I still sometimes struggle with trust, still sometimes catch myself looking for signs of deception that aren't there. But I'm learning to recognize the difference between healthy skepticism and paranoid hypervigilance. Rachel remarried about a year after our divorce was final. I heard through mutual friends that she'd told her new husband she was a victim of emotional abuse, that I'd abandoned her when she was sick. I wondered if she actually believed that narrative, or if it was just another manipulation. I also heard that she'd had several minor illnesses and accidents in the first year of her new marriage. A fall down the stairs, a bout of food poisoning, a mysterious rash that required several doctor visits. I hoped I was wrong about what that might mean. The whole experience taught me something important about the nature of truth in relationships. We want to believe the people we love. We want to trust them, to take their word for things, to assume good intentions. That's what makes us human, what makes love possible. But it's also what makes us vulnerable to those who would exploit that trust. I learned that love without truth is just manipulation wearing a prettier mask. That sacrifice without reciprocity is just enabling abuse. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to refuse to participate in their self-destructive patterns. Most importantly, I learned that I deserved better. That everyone deserves to be loved honestly, without games or manipulation or artificial crises designed to manufacture devotion. The fake illness that was supposed to save Rachel's marriage destroyed it instead. But in the ruins of that relationship, I found something real and lasting. I found myself again, and I found someone who loved me enough to want me to be free. If you're in a relationship where you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, where your partner's needs always seem to eclipse your own, where love feels more like obligation than joy, please know that you deserve better. You deserve truth, even when it's difficult. You deserve partnership, not servitude. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not manipulated into being who someone else needs you to be. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that your feelings don't matter, that your needs are selfish, that love requires you to sacrifice your own well-being indefinitely. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to refuse to enable someone else's destructive behavior. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself and give the other person a chance to face the truth about what they become. The truth will set you free, but first it will probably destroy everything you thought you knew about your life. That's okay. Sometimes destruction is necessary for rebirth. Sometimes you have to let the lies burn away to discover what's actually worth saving. I'm grateful now for the collapse of my first marriage, as painful as it was. It taught me the difference between genuine love and skilled manipulation. It showed me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive the loss of someone I'd built my entire identity around. And it led me to Sarah, to real love, to the kind of partnership where both people are free to be themselves without fear of manipulation or retaliation. That's worth fighting for. That's worth waiting for. That's worth the courage it takes to walk away from something that looks like love but feels like imprisonment. The fake illness didn't save Rachel's marriage, but in a strange way, it saved me from a life of quiet desperation I didn't even know I was living. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really made of. What's your story? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was manipulating you? How did you find the courage to face the truth and rebuild? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the complicated truth of human relationships.